Have you ever felt like something was just off at your workplace? Like someone was watching you, even when you were alone? Most of us go to work expecting the usual stress, meetings, deadlines, annoying co-workers. But for some, work became a nightmare. These are 4 horrifying, true workplace horror stories. If you're new here, welcome to a place where the lights flicker, the doors creak, and every shadow might just be something watching. If you love terrifying true stories, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss what lurks in the dark. Now, let's get into the first story. A city like a predator, cloaking the familiar streets in shadows. But for Sarah, the office building, aglow with artificial light, offered a different kind of jungle. She thrived in the quiet hum of computers, the stillness of a workplace devoid of its usual inhabitants. For almost a year she had found a strange solace in working late at the small marketing firm, often past 10 p.m., the silence her only companion. But lately, the silence had become observant. It began subtly, like the first tremor before an earthquake. Her chair, always left in the same position, would be slightly askew. Desk drawers, shut tight before she left, would be found slightly open, as if pried at by unseen fingers. Then came the emails. A message, stark and unsettling, from an anonymous sender. "You look nice today." A shiver ran down her spine, but she dismissed it as a prank. The next night, however, another email arrived, this one more insidious. "You work too late. You should go home." Fear, like a creeping vine, began to take root in Sarah's mind. The third night she confessed her unease to her manager. His response was a dismissive chuckle. "Probably just a bored IT guy. Don't let it get to you." So she tried. But the office, once a sanctuary of productivity, had transformed into a breeding ground for paranoia. Then one night, the silence was broken. A soft, shallow breathing, close enough to make the hairs on her neck stand on end. She spun around, heart hammering against her ribs. Nothing. The office was empty. Just her imagination, she thought, forcing herself to relax. But when she turned back to her screen, a new email notification flashed, confirming her worst fears. "I like when you wear your hair down." Panic seized her. She grabbed her things, a frantic scramble in the darkness, and fled the office. The next day, she demanded it trace the emails, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. The answer, when it came, was worse than she could have imagined. The emails weren't coming from outside the company. They were being sent from inside the building, from her floor, from a computer that no one was assigned to. Sarah refused to work late after that. For weeks, she made sure she left before sundown, the fear a constant shadow. The old factory stood on the edge of town, a hulking silhouette against the dying light. It was a place of industry, of sweat and toil, where machines roared and metal sang. But beneath the veneer of productivity, a darkness lingered, a chilling reminder of a tragedy long past. For Alex, the new night security guard, the factory was more than just a job. It was a descent into a nightmare he could never have anticipated. He had taken the job for its simplicity. Walk the floors, check the cameras, lock the doors. A solitary vigil in the dead of night. What he hadn't accounted for was the oppressive atmosphere, the feeling that he was always being watched. The factory had been the site of a horrific accident in the 1970s. A machine malfunctioned, turning on its operators with brutal efficiency, killing 3 workers before it could be stopped. The factory had been shuttered for a time, a silent monument to the tragedy. But eventually it reopened, new owners, new machines. But the whispers remained, tales of the workers who never truly left. Alex scoffed at the stories. Ghosts weren't real, or so he told himself. But then the strange occurrences began. The first time it was the security doors, locking and unlocking by themselves, as if controlled by an unseen hand. Then came the cold spots. Not just the cool air from the vents, but a bone-chilling cold that seemed to emanate from the very walls, a coldness that seeped into his bones. But what truly shook him to his core were the screams. One night, around 3 a.m., he was making his rounds when he heard it. A scream, raw and primal, echoing through the cavernous space. It was coming from the old machine room, the site of the accident. Alex froze, his flashlight beam trembling in the darkness. He tried to rationalize it, the wind whistling through the broken windows, a stray animal trapped inside. But then the sound changed. It wasn't just screaming anymore, it was voices, low murmurs, barely audible at first, then growing louder, more insistent, whispering his name. "Alex, Alex, come see." He turned and ran, his heart pounding a frantic tattoo against his ribs. He didn't stop until he reached the security office, slamming the door shut behind him. The elevator hummed softly, its fluorescent lights casting a sterile glow on the brushed steel interior. For most, it was a mundane conveyance, a metal box that whisked them between floors with impersonal efficiency. But for Jake, a temporary worker toiling away in the corporate hive, the elevator became something else entirely. A confined space of terror, a metal coffin hurtling towards an unknown fate. He hadn't meant to stay late, just a few more spreadsheets, he told himself, caught in the endless loop of menial tasks. But time, as it often did, slipped away from him. By the time he looked up from his computer, the office was deserted, the silence broken only by the hum of the air conditioning. He sighed, shutting down his computer and grabbing his bag. The stairs, he remembered with a groan, were locked after hours. His only way out was the elevator. The ride down started normally enough, smooth, silent, the numbers on the panel ticking down towards the ground floor. Then the lights flickered, just a momentary blip, but enough to send a shiver down his spine. The building was old, he reminded himself, probably just faulty wiring. But then the elevator shuddered, the smooth descent turning into a jarring halt. He was stuck. Panic, like a caged animal, began to stir within him. He pressed the emergency button, but only met with silence. No reassuring voice, no crackle of static. He pulled out his phone, but there was no signal. He was trapped, alone in the silent belly of the building. He leaned against the wall, trying to control his breathing, when he heard it, breathing. But it wasn't his own. It was coming from behind him, shallow and raspy, close enough to make the hairs on his neck stand on end. Slowly, hesitantly, he turned towards the sound, his gaze drawn to the elevator's mirrored wall. His reflection stared back at him, a pale and frightened spectre. But then he noticed something else. The reflection behind him was wrong. While his own reflection was normal, the one behind him was subtly off. Its mouth was stretched into a grotesque grin, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. Jake froze, his blood turning to ice in his veins. The breathing grew louder, closer, and then the lights went out. He was plunged into darkness, the air thick with the smell of ozone and something else, something metallic and cloying. The old hotel stood tall and proud, a grand dame of a bygone era. Its facade, adorned with intricate carvings and graceful balconies, whispered tales of lavish parties and whispered secrets. For Lisa, weary from a long day of meetings, it promised a night of respite, a temporary sanctuary from the demands of her job. But the hotel, steeped in history and shrouded in shadow, held something else entirely, a darkness that seeped into her very bones, turning her business trip into a desperate fight for survival. She had checked in late, her mind buzzing with figures and deadlines. The vintage decor, the antique furniture, the hushed elegance of the lobby did little to soothe her frayed nerves. Her room, though spacious and well-appointed, felt strangely cold, the air heavy with a musty, almost oppressive scent. The lights flickered occasionally, casting grotesque shadows on the walls, and the old radiator hissed and groaned like a living thing. She tried to ignore the unsettling atmosphere, attributing it to the building's age and her own exhaustion. But then the noises started. At first it was just the creaking of floorboards, the groan of settling wood, the sound of the wind whistling through the old windows. But then she heard whispers, faint, unintelligible murmurs that seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves, slithering into her consciousness like icy fingers. Lisa tried to rationalize it, telling herself it was just the old pipes, the wind playing tricks on her ears. But as the night wore on, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. She could hear her name being called over and over again, a chilling chorus just beyond the realm of comprehension. Panic began to rise in her chest, a cold knot of fear tightening its grip. She picked up the phone to call the front desk, but the line was dead. She tried her cell phone, but there was no signal. She was trapped, cut off from the outside world, alone with the whispers and the growing certainty that something was terribly wrong. Desperate, she decided to leave the room to find help, to escape the suffocating atmosphere of her haunted sanctuary. But as she opened the door, she was met with a sight that chilled her to the bone. The hallway, dimly lit by flickering gas lamps, was filled with shadowy figures, their eyes glowing with an eerie, malevolent light. They were watching her, waiting, their silence more terrifying than any scream. She slammed the door shut, her heart pounding a frantic tattoo against her ribs. She backed away, only to feel a cold hand on her shoulder. She spun around, her breath catching in her throat, but there was no one there. Wait until you hear what happened to a night shift security guard at a factory with a deadly past. This is just a glimpse into the chilling world of workplace horror. If you dare to venture further into the darkness, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, so you never miss a story from the other side. Sleep well, if you can.